Hello, this is Lisa Meister. I'm a survivor of satanic ritual abuse, and this podcast is Only God Rescued Me, my journey from satanic ritual abuse. Today, we have a guest with us, RebeccaDavis, and I have been waiting for this for a long time, and God finally said this is the moment for it, and you will see why in just a minute. She is a hero for SRA survivors, and she has stepped into a very difficult ministry. So welcome, Rebecca. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Lisa. It's a privilege.
Tell me about yourself.
So I wear several different hats. I am writing, I think the thing that people most know about me, I'm not that well known, but if they do know me, usually what they know is that I have a series of books called Untwisting Scriptures that were used to tie you up, gag you, and tingle your mind, specifically targeted to help people with spiritual abuse that they've experienced. And there are a lot of people out there who have experienced that, both within the satanic ritual abuse survivor world and outside of that world too. So there are 3 books in that series so far. The first one addressing your rights, biblical bitterness, and taking up offenses. The second one addressing patriarchy, the biblical patriarchy movement, and spiritual authority. And the third one addressing your words and your emotions. That one just came out in November of 2021. And I hope next year to work on volume 4, which should be subtitled Righteousness and Wickedness. So I'm also a trauma-informed book coach. I work with people who are writing nonfiction books of all kinds, except usually focused on either trauma or Bible study. And I'm also a spiritual coach, prayer minister, which is why I'm here on your podcast today.
I appreciate that. So you are not an SRA survivor yourself.
I am not.
So how in the world did you get into this work?
Well, in 2012, 2013, the Lord led me and my husband down a road of learning some things about the world, and our world was upended a bit when we started to understand what was going on in the government and the military and some various areas. And then my attention was directed to a sexual abuse investigation that was going on at Bob Jones University in my area here in South Carolina. And a friend asked me to please research it. And I took to it with a will. And when I started researching that and putting it together with some other things I had learned, that led me to start investigating satanic ritual abuse. And before, I had not wanted to look at it because it was too horrible. But I became willing. This was about 2013. I cried out to God about it because it was so terrible. And I told him I didn't want to know about this unless I could use it to help someone. I even said, this sounds so selfish, but I said, my world was really nice. Why did you mess it up?
I get that. Yeah.
And I've written about this. I've blogged about this on my blog, here'sthejoy.com, in a blog post called Christians and Conspiracy Theories, that I finally determined that I would rather walk in a difficult truth than in a pleasant lie.
Wow. Now that is a heart after God. That's, to me, taking up your cross and following him.
Well, that was just the beginning. So just finding out the truth was just the first step.
So what made you believe it? Because so many people say this is a conspiracy theory, and a lot of the churches say, oh, come on, that's just demonic. That doesn't happen.
Yes. So there are several arguments against it because it is a kind of terrible abuse that's hidden in plain sight. But one of the arguments against it is the False Memory Syndrome Foundation so-called debunking that happened in the 90s. And I researched all of that and understood what was behind it. Jim Frieson's book, The Truth About False Memory Syndrome, was very helpful to me in that regard. Jim Frieson was one of the pioneers in this movement in the 90s. And then, of course, the other thing about it being just demonic, I know a lot of Christians, I mean, it is demonic, it's satanic, of course. So of course it's demonic, but there's so much more to it than that. And a friend asked me a couple of years ago, I guess, so why do you think this is real, or what? I mean, she wasn't just challenging me, she truly wanted to understand. And so I wrote a paper for her with all of the arguments I could come up with for satanic ritual abuse being real, arguments from the Bible, arguments from history, arguments from legal cases, arguments from therapists who agree that it's real. I mean, well-respected therapists such as Diane Langberg, Heather Gingrich, and some other arguments, I'm sure, but it was a lengthy paper, several pages, to make that argument. And I wouldn't mind, giving that to you
Sure, please.
to post somewhere if you wanted to.
I would love it. That would be great. So did you get training to step into this?
Well, when I understood that it was real, I was saying to the Lord, I don't want to, why should I even know about this unless I can help someone? Why should I be burdened with this information unless I can actually do something about it? So I was seeking the Lord in that way. And the first conference on sexual abuse that I went to, by some strange coincidence, was a conference that talked about satanic ritual abuse. That was in February of 2013. And the man mentioned, the speaker mentioned the term Theophastic, which wasn't at all familiar to me. I didn't know that term. And later, when I was praying and asking the Lord, like several months later, I think, that word came back to me. And I said, I don't know what about that. So I just looked it up on the internet, and this whole entire world of prayer ministry opened up before me that I had no idea existed. I'm from an independent Baptist background. So we, in that background, didn't acknowledge spiritual warfare or the Lord speaking to us in any way other than the Bible. And I had gotten beyond that, so I knew that that wasn't true, but still I had never heard of prayer ministry, or if I had, it hadn't stuck in my head, and I wasn't familiar with it. So I studied Theophastic, eventually decided to step away from that and move on to the Emmanuel approach, which I thought was a better type of prayer ministry, and got trained in that. And that took maybe a couple of years, that whole journey.
Can you explain the Emmanuel approach? I've been through both. I've been through Theophastic and counseling, and I've been through Emmanuel. So can you explain the difference between them?
Yes, I'm mostly going to talk about Emmanuel because since I'm not trained in Theophastic, I probably wouldn't explain it very well. But what attracted me to Emmanuel from Theophastic was its emphasis on having what I call an anchor memory, what the founder calls a safety net. It was founded, or it was developed, I should say, by Carl Lehman, who is a Christian psychiatrist. And he had used EMDR with good effect, and he had used Theophastic. But then when he developed the Emmanuel approach, he found, and it developed almost by accident, or the beginning of it developed almost by accident, and then he continued to develop it. He found that it was more effective than either EMDR or Theophastic. And it starts with a good memory. So the brain science behind this is that when you go into a good memory, going into it in the sense that you are bringing back the sights and sounds and smells of that good memory, that what he calls an appreciation memory, then your relational circuits in your brain start to open up. And we can then connect with the Lord better. The reason this is so important is because if a person goes into a traumatic memory, a person can get stuck there, and the prayer minister in a theophastic setting, the prayer minister might say, do you see Jesus anywhere in there? And the person might say, no, I don't see him anywhere. I'm just stuck and these people are hurting me. And then it can just go bad really quick. And that's the reason I said, I'm not going to do theophastic, because I'm the one who's going to hurt people that way. And I have, in fact, done that to someone, to my great grief. But in the Emmanuel approach, what happens instead is when the person is stuck in the traumatic memory and can't sense the Lord anywhere there, then the prayer minister can say, well, let's just go right back to the beach and sit there looking at the sunset with the Lord or with your family, or whatever the memory was, and let's just stay there for a while. And sometimes I'll even say, can you ask the Lord to talk to you about what happened while you're here on the beach with him? And often we're able to do that. So I got training in the Emmanuel approach from a local prayer minister who became a good friend. She is a licensed counselor. And I'm just very, very thankful to have gotten that training, because it is fairly simple, that the basic underlying understanding of it. There's a lot to be developed in wisdom and understanding how to handle hard things and seeking the Lord. But that basic aspect of it is really quite simple.
I know Theophastic really helped me. So we were doing EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization, reprocessing, and it'd be a couple hour session for one memory, and we get to the end, and I was just, I'd be over the memory, like emotionally I could think through it without falling apart, but it would be days of recovery. So then, she learned about Theophastic, which is wonderful. Do you see Jesus? Where is he? What's he doing? And bringing him into that was powerful and helpful, but still we get to the end of it, I'd be like, I'm exhausted. Where when I go through the Emmanuel approach, we rescue a dissociated part, we get done, I'm like, it's just this wonderful release. It's like, wow, it's like this beautiful healing that happens, instead of like surgeon amputating your leg with a saw and oops, sorry, we don't have any anesthetic for you, So all the approaches have worked and all have helped me tremendously. But when I found the Emmanuel approach, I was like, oh, this is wonderful.
Yes, I'm very thankful for it. And I was drawn to that originally when I was just desperately praying and seeking the Lord, because he made it very clear this was the direction I was supposed to go. I was drawn to it because on Carl Lehman's website, he gives away so much material, hundreds and hundreds of pages of material. And at that time, I didn't really have any money to go through training. And I was just reading and reading and reading. And I was so thankful that he was so generous to give away so much like this.
That's amazing. And that is a problem, is, to get the training takes money. And also for survivors to get help takes money, because the people that are doing it should be paid for what they're doing. Survivors don't tend to have a lot of money. So another thing that I'm seeing is survivors getting the help, getting some training, and helping other survivors who in turn are helping other survivors. So it's kind of a very, under the level sort of thing. And I'm sure counselors would go crazy with it, the legalities or whatever, but there's just not a lot of people to help and to do that yet.
And the need is so great.
Very, very great. So did you get training by any other means?
Yes, even while I was studying the Theophastic and the Emmanuel approach, I was also reading voraciously, reading a lot of memoirs. And that is how I connected with you, Lisa, because I read your memoir. I think I read your memoir in 2018 because I continued reading as many memoirs as I could, watching online testimonials, listening to court testimonies, reading other books. And I found Diane Hawkins and Restoration in Christ Ministries. I went through her training. I found a few other people who have training. And as the Lord provided, I went through their training as well. So the Emmanuel approach certainly hasn't been my only training.
It takes, it's really good that you have surrounded yourself in hearing from a lot of different people. It certainly makes it better, well-rounded. What are some good resources for people who are ready to start? You've said Diane Hawkins, Jim Freesome, Carl Lehman. Do you have others?
Yes, I have. Somebody else asked me about that too, and I made a list and I saved that list because I thought, well, I might need this someday. So I don't have that in front of me, but I could easily give that to you. I could get it all organized and send that to you to post if you'd like to. These are resources that have helped me to a greater or lesser degree. And some of them are just books to read, like memoirs. Memoirs have been extremely helpful to me, understanding people's process of healing. That has been hugely helpful. Patricia Clark is another one that's been very helpful to me. She wrote Restoring Survivors of Satanic Ritual Abuse. She has a hot air balloon on the cover of her book. That was a very helpful book, very encouraging, because she also started without understanding like me, but she started when a survivor came to her. The Lord told me to start getting ready before he brought survivors to me. So it worked a little different. But yes, there are quite a few resources that have been very helpful for me. And I could easily send that to you.
That would be great. I can put it in the show notes for everybody who's listening. What's your best advice for how to get involved? I have people contact me all the time. I'm not a survivor, but I care about this. I would like to get involved. What could I do? Not everyone's going to want to be a coach, but what else can we do?
Well, I started on this journey completely alone, not talking to anyone about it. My husband sort of knew my husband is a safe person. He sort of knew I was investigating it, but it was too much for him too. So he couldn't hear too much about it. So I did it alone. I wasn't going to anyone asking, how can I get involved? I was just asking the Lord. And I was going online and looking for resources. And he did begin to send me SRA survivors. One of them I met at a women's breakfast. I said something about SRA to the person sitting beside me, because, here it was so heavy on my heart. And I thought, does anybody else believe this? Is anybody else aware of this? And so I said something about SRA to this woman sitting next to me at the luncheon or at the breakfast. And she said, I'm an SRA survivor.
Wow.
And
wow.
We ended up sitting there talking for about 3 hours. She is still a very dear friend. So the Lord, I want to emphasize, don't just say, I want to get involved. Go to the Lord and say, what do you want me to do? Because the Lord, some of us are the hand, some of us are the eye, some of us are the foot. He has different work for each of us. And for me, this path of being a spiritual coach, prayer minister, was a long path, learning for about 4 years before I actually did anything. And I wasn't even actively seeking people to help. The Lord just started bringing them to me the way he brought me that woman at the prayer breakfast. So if Lisa isn't in a position to tell people, so here's what you can do to help. The Lord is in the position to tell you what you can do to help. And I strongly urge you, get training through reading memoirs like I did. I think that was invaluable. And I'm so thankful for the people like Lisa who are willing to tell their stories, and get training through some of the many people who have given of themselves to put training out there, like Diane Hawkins, Elaine Picala, Russ Dizdar. There are others who have put training out there that I can't speak to the value of their training since I haven't been through it, but some of them just can be very, very helpful to you. And your heart has to be prepared, because it is a dark, dark world. You have to be strong in the Lord, because the enemy is going to try to convince you that the enemy is stronger than the Lord. And sometimes the enemy will seem stronger than the Lord, but he isn't. And the Lord always wins if we keep going to him. So I would say build your relationship with the Lord. My journey into this ministry is backed up by 40 years of Bible study, 40 years of getting to know the Lord through his word, and then working with abuse survivors of other kinds, sexual abuse, domestic abuse. And that is my primary ministry. I haven't talked about my SRA ministry publicly until today. So,
oh, wow, I did not know that. Oh, I'm so honored.
I mentioned it in that blog post, Christians and Conspiracy Theories. I mentioned that these people come to me, but I didn't really talk a lot about what I do in that blog post. So I would say to anyone who wants to help, seek the Lord. Seek the Lord. You're aghast, you're horrified that this thing is real, as I was, and we want to fight it, but we want to fight it in the wisdom and knowledge of God. We want to fight it with his weapons, putting on the armor of God, breastplate of righteousness of the Lord Jesus Christ, the helmet of his salvation, all the things that he tells us to have. And those things, we can't just be flippant about those things, because we will be knocked down and cast out if we don't take it very, very seriously. So I would say the first step, the main step, is seek the Lord and keep seeking the Lord all through this journey.
How have you personally helped survivors?
Well, by being a friend, I think that might be the first thing, possibly the most important thing. But as I mentioned, I had several years of training. And then in 2017, the Lord brought me the first person into my life who wasn't already seeing someone else, wasn't already getting help, or hadn't already mostly completed her journey. Someone who was very stuck, very desperate, extremely, extremely desperate. The Lord brought her into my life, like smack in front of me. And it's almost like he said to me, okay, now it's time, boot camp time. So that was it. So I'll call her Mary. That was Mary. I call everybody Mary.
Well, can you tell me about Mary?
Yes, Mary does actually she has actually given me permission to talk about her story. So Mary came to me. Well, actually, a mutual friend reached out and asked me to help Mary. And I thought, Mary is an atheist. I know that from Facebook. And I don't think she's going to want to hear from me because I'm an outspoken Christian. And this friend said, oh, yes, she'll want to hear from you and you can help her. I said, oh boy. So I wrote to Mary just a friendly note. Hey, so-and-so asked me to reach out to you. How you doing? Something like that. And Mary responded with a very long description of everything she was experiencing. And I was surprised at the length of her response. But honestly, this friend didn't know anything about SRA. I had no idea that Mary's problem was SRA. I just knew Mary was in a bad way and needed help. And this friend somehow thought I could help. So I was not thinking, oh, Mary's an SRA survivor when she came to me. Not at all. It was just, I've helped a lot of people in various states of having trouble, and she was just another one. And so Mary, in her description of her problems, described some symptoms of dissociation. Well, I recognized dissociation. I'd been studying for 4 years. And so I knew what was going on. Like when she says, sometimes I float above my body when I'm in an argument. And I thought, oh, that's depersonalization. She's disconnecting from her body. That's a kind of dissociation. And then over the course of the next, few days, when I didn't leave, she kept on saying things like, my problems are too much for you. You won't be able to help me. And I said, I don't know if I can help you or not, but I'm not leaving unless you want me to. So then within the next few days, a little girl messaged me in the middle of the night from Mary's account. And I thought, oh, I think we might be looking at DID here. Now, I want to hasten to say I don't diagnose because I'm not a licensed therapist. I was just observing and thinking about possibilities. We might be looking at a small child part of this person. Then Mary also started, as she began to trust me more. This is all like within the course of 2 weeks, because it was a very intense beginning to our relationship. She began to describe these 3 beings, dark beings, that she started calling the glowing-eyed dudes. And so I thought, okay, we're looking at possibly some child parts and possibly some demonization. And when I urged Mary to start reading the book of Mark, the simplest, shortest gospel, I said, in your childhood, she had told me that her father had hurt her. In your childhood, God was distorted. It was a pseudo-Christian home. God was distorted. Read the book of Mark to see what Jesus is really like. And she started reading it. And then these glowing-eyed dudes became extremely fierce toward her. And after a time, they started writing me emails. And it was very clear there was a very serious battle for her soul going on. And that was over the course of about 6 weeks. And I felt ready for it. It was a little overwhelming, but basically I felt ready for it because of all the training the Lord had brought me through. And I want to point out, I didn't go looking for her. Somebody else referred her to me. And that is because by this time, 2017, I'd been speaking out about abuse. I'd been posting about abuse on my website, Here's the Joy, and not necessarily SRA, but about sexual abuse in the Christian world, domestic abuse in the Christian world, spiritual abuse. And so this mutual friend thought I was knowledgeable and could help her. And so I was ready. Mary was my boot camp after all my schooling.
Wow. So how long did you work with Mary?
Mary and I are still very good friends, and it's been 4 years.
Okay. Wow. So tell me more about dissociation and DID. You talked about her contacting you with young parts. Then you had demons talking to you. So can you explain some of that a little bit?
Well, back when I was studying during those 4 years, the people I was studying from would talk about how to tell the difference between a part and a demon. Like, they're both voices in the head, so how do you tell the difference? And so I was concerned, am I going to be able to tell the difference? Well, with Mary, it was super clear. Like, there was no question. This is a little girl saying, Daddy's hurting me, Mommy, please help me. This is a glowing-eyed dude saying, we are going to kill her and take her to hell, back off and leave her alone. And they said worse things than that. But that, I thought it was very kind of the Lord to give me something that was so simple and clear at the beginning. Since then, I've had other cases that are not as clear, and it's harder to distinguish, but that first one was very clear. So more about dissociation and DID. Well, I'm sure you've talked on your podcast probably several times about how dissociation is on a spectrum from mild to severe. And that example I gave of floating above your body is one kind of dissociation. That's depersonalization, feeling disconnected from your body. And sometimes when I'm working with people, I'll ask them, do you ever feel separate from your body? Do you ever feel like maybe you're standing in the doorway looking at your body doing stuff? And that's the way we can determine if they're having, if they have a depersonalization issue. There's also another typical kind called derealization where they feel separate or disconnected from the world around them. But the more complex and extreme types of dissociation would include dissociative identity disorder. And this is when a person has actual parts of themselves. They may or may not have their own names. And those particular parts of themselves are someplace inside, maybe a dark room or a dungeon or a cave or someplace, and they need help. And then even more, I might say even more complex than that is when a person has gone through scientific type dissociation that results in hundreds or thousands of parts that have very specific jobs. And I've encountered that in my work too. But this dissociation, if it's done, I want to say if it's done well, but let me clarify that. If a child dissociates cleanly in childhood, if a child's very intelligent, very creative, and some other things, then the child is more likely to dissociate their trauma very cleanly, and then they won't remember anything. It'll be like having a day child and a night child. When they get to the teen years, they might have struggles like anorexia or cutting or something, but they won't know why. And then when they get to be an adult, and this, I'm just describing a typical scenario. This isn't always the way it works, of course, but often when they get to be an adult, the dissociative barriers start to break down. They start to have the flashbacks and the nightmares of their abuse from childhood, and they don't know what's going on. Maybe they think they're going crazy. They start to hear the voices of the little ones. And again, that's another thing that makes them think they're going crazy. In Mary's case, she was hearing the little voices and she went for counseling. She was diagnosed schizophrenic, not on paper. On paper, they put major depressive disorder, I believe, but schizophrenic is what they thought she was. And they gave her antipsychotic meds. Now, with the person who has DID, antipsychotic meds are going to make her worse because that was not the problem. Schizophrenia is a real diagnosis, but it's not what Mary had. She heard voices, but it wasn't mental illness. It was her child parts. And in some cases, it was the glowing eye dudes or the demonic entities. So what she needed was not antipsychotic meds, which made her far, far worse, but she needed help, someone who understood dissociation and understood what eventually came to be revealed as satanic ritual abuse in her case. But it took a while for that to unfold as various parts of her trusted me and were willing to come forward and tell their story.
Trust is really difficult for survivors. We talked about it a little bit before we started today. How do you encourage survivors to be able to begin to trust enough to go into like a prayer ministry sort of thing with you?
That is really, really challenging. And when people tell me, I have trouble with trust, I don't really trust you, my answer is always something along the lines of, I totally get it. I mean, your trust has been violated your entire life. Usually the trafficking, the satanic ritual abuse happened at the hands of family members who should be the most trustworthy people of all, like the family members who are supposed to care for you when you're a child. So sometimes people will apologize for not trusting me, and I say, no, I get it. The only way for you to trust me is for me to prove trustworthy. So if you don't trust me, I understand, and I would be sorry, but I understand. So sometimes people will apologize and say, I've stalked you for a year on your Facebook page before reaching out to you. And I'd say, don't apologize for that. And that's not stalking, that's research. You are researching me to try to figure out if I'm a safe person to reach out to or not. So I understand. Trust is a huge problem. And sometimes people will reach out to me, and then out of fear, they will withdraw and not communicate with me again. And so I continue to pray for them, but I understand that trust is so, so hard, because sometimes cult members are disguising themselves as therapists. And or I don't even want to say that. Sometimes therapists are dissociative themselves and perhaps have a part of themselves that isn't fully healed. A lot of people go into therapy or counseling because they're looking for healing for themselves. And so sometimes therapists or counselors might not be trustworthy simply because they themselves are not fully healed from whatever it is they experienced.
Right. Secondary trauma is a big problem for helpers in SRA. So how do you handle this work?
That is a real issue. I have a close relationship with the Lord, and I take my trauma to the Lord when I experience it. Sometimes I forget to, because, or forget isn't the right word. Sometimes I don't think to, because I feel like a session hasn't hit me as hard as it really has. And sometimes it might hit me later. But back when I started this, and it was so, so hard hearing the stories. I mean, I was completely overwhelmed, because at the beginning, I did not know that people did such evil to other people. I was so naive. I was so naive. I did not know that such evil was done. How can man be so inhumane to man? It was absolutely mind-boggling to me. And I would go to bed and say to the Lord, Lord, I do not have the capacity for this. I do not have the capacity. And then I prayed and said, Lord, you have all the capacity in the world. Would you give me some more of that? And as I began to get trained in the Emmanuel approach, and the word capacity was used a lot because that's what it's about, I realized my prayer was being answered. And the Lord was so gently training me, because the Emmanuel approach is all about having a close relationship with the Lord in the context of a good memory. And in that joyful memory, he talks about, Carl Lehman and Jim Wilder are the teachers who talk about this mostly. They talk about filling your joy bucket. And as your joy bucket is filled, then your capacity to hold trauma is greater. And I've seen that the Lord has done that for me as well. And it's beautiful work. And I get to see, besides the fact that I go to the Lord with my trauma, also, we have to remember, I get to see the Lord do amazing things for people. A trauma part of a person is stuck in a dark place, or stuck in the middle of the trauma, or after she's out of it, she has to talk about the trauma because that's part of the processing. And then the Lord delivers her, takes her to the safe place. And often it's by a certain point, it's not even that good memory anymore. It's some internal safe place that he's made, like a beautiful meadow that has springs and creeks and things. And he takes her there and heals her body and her soul and her mind, and cleans her up and gives her clean clothes. And this part of this person becomes like new. She's made new, and she's healed. And then the whole person is healed just a little bit more, as that one part of the person is healed there and brought to Jesus. Often she'll sleep for a while because maybe she's had to stay awake for years. And this, what I'm saying, must sound very strange to people who don't know about working with internal parts, but that's the way it was for me when I first started studying and listening to Carl Lehman and Jim Wilder And some of these other people, I was mind blown over and over, but now I do it all the time, and it's become my normal, that helping internal parts get to Jesus is what I expect to do as I do this work. And that is a beautiful thing. And that's an encouraging thing for me too. So that helps with dealing with the trauma.
You've talked about being a compassionate witness. What is that?
A compassionate witness is, I don't remember if I made up that term or if I got it from somewhere else. So if I got it from somewhere else, then thank you to whoever that was from. But I am so convinced that this is what every Christian, everyone who really knows the Lord, can do. You can be a compassionate witness for someone else, because it simply takes being able to be present with them, and as much as possible to be fully present with them. Now, I haven't succeeded with that in the past before the Lord built my capacity to be able to be fully present with those who have hard stories to tell. But one of my friends, it was the friend I met at the prayer breakfast, she talked about how important it is to be fully known, because SRA survivors are carrying a dark secret, and it isn't a secret of their own devising. It's a secret that was thrust upon them. And it's a secret because society isn't willing to accept the truth. And as Christians are willing to say, I will accept the truth. Lord, open my heart. Lord, build my capacity. Then I believe, just as he did with me, the Lord will bring people to you. The Lord will bring you people. You won't have to say, how do I get started? You seek the Lord, you get your training, and you expect the Lord to bring you people when it's time, because the Lord himself is the one who's going to say, yes, now you're ready. Now I'm going to bring you someone. And you know what? They are all around you. When I first started studying this, I was saying things like, why am I learning about this? I don't know any of these people. And the Lord said to me, you will know them. Now, the Lord doesn't often talk to me, but that time he did. Or maybe I should say, I can't often hear him, but that time I could. He said, you will know them. And I came to find out that they were people all around me. They were around me. They were in my life. And I just didn't know it, because there was this parallel universe thing going on. And they had this desire to be known, to be fully known, that my friend talked about. And we desperately need compassionate witnesses who will say, yes, I will receive the story. I won't think this is just mental illness because I've gotten training about it. I won't tell you, you should be over this by now. I won't tell you, go memorize this Bible verse and then you'll be all better. I will listen. I will receive. In the appendix of my most recent book, which is the Untwisting Scriptures book about your words and your emotions, the appendix is about moral injury. And this is a term that is used beyond PTSD to indicate when someone has been forced to do something that is a violation of that person's morals. Now, the author of the book I was basing this off of was talking about soldiers in war, like they have to kill a baby, maybe. I don't know. But he was talking about soldiers in war. And of course, for me, I immediately applied it to the people in my life. Well, SRA survivors, they had to do all kinds of things that inflicted deep moral injuries on them. And it's beyond PTSD. When there's a moral injury, it has to be healed. And I love the term moral injury, because which the author of that book picked very carefully, but it is indicates that it can be healed, and Jesus is the one who heals it. So when I and the person I'm working with can go to the Lord together, we see him healing those moral injuries. We see him assuring her it's not your fault. And I can tell her it's not your fault, and she can tell herself it's not my fault. But it's different when the Lord does it. When the Lord says, this was not your fault, and she can hear that from him, then it takes root. Then she can be free. Then she can be healed of that moral injury.
Thank you. I like that idea of moral injury. There's so many survivors with horror stories about how Christians have handled their disclosure of SRA. And I know that the church can do better, and slowly this is getting out there. So I really appreciate it, because when a survivor discloses SRA to somebody, it's at great personal cost to themselves. And
Yes.
sometimes it's might be the first time, or maybe it's been years, and they haven't had someone respond with compassion. So when you can respond in compassion, even if you don't understand it, even if everything inside of you is saying, this makes no sense, we can be compassionate, we can listen, and we can let them know that we care, and that we can pray with them.
Yes. And to say, you may not be able to say, I believe you, until you do some research, but you can say, I care about you and I want to be here for you. And I hope that ultimately you'll be able to say, I believe you.
Now, the interesting thing too is I've been able to give my testimony in a couple churches, which has been an amazing opportunity. And afterwards, I have been inundated with people waiting to talk to me, and they will tell me their stories. And it might not be SRA, but there'll be people maybe 60 even and above, and they'll say, I've never told anybody this, but I know you will understand. And then they'll tell me some horrible thing that happened to them, tears in their eyes. Finally, I can tell somebody. We all have that need to share,
Yes.
so that someone can help minister healing to us.
Yes.
We're not
It's
made to
just
hold it.
so that someone will believe me, so that someone will understand, because one of the worst things to happen is to feel like you were treated dismissively. Like this huge thing that you're holding, this huge terrible thing that someone just says, it's not that bad. That is just like the worst thing ever, and people would rather hold the secret forever than to have it treated dismissively.
I had a survivor this weekend very profoundly say to me that survivors are the people left in the ditch that everybody walks over, that we don't go back to get them out. Nobody cares about us.
I am just, one of my passions is to see that change. And there are people who care. Certainly there are, but there aren't enough.
Right. God's raising them up though,
Yes.
bit by bit. And that's part of what today is. So tell us more about the need for helpers to help those who've suffered SRA.
Well, I guess part of that would be my message to skeptics, because there are many who believe that SRA was fully debunked in the 1990s, and it's not a thing. It doesn't happen. And so understanding the history of all of that was part of my education. I mentioned Jim Friesen in his book, but it is a true thing that actually happens, and the people are around you. And if you are a Christian, if you do believe in Jesus Christ, then it only makes sense for you to believe that the worst kinds of things, that people are capable of the worst kinds of things. This was not something I had worked through fully, certainly, when I first began to learn about it, but it isn't talked about. So I hadn't, but that I don't have an excuse for not having understood that. But I am going to say to you, if you're a skeptic about this, that there is biblical basis to believe this, because just saying, well, that was long ago when people offered their children in sacrifices to false gods, that was a long time ago. I'm saying the same stuff still goes on, and there's no reason to think that just because it happened a long time ago doesn't mean it doesn't happen anymore. And I wrote a paper for a friend when she asked, can you help me? Is this real? Can you help me understand why this is real? I wrote a paper for her, giving her biblical support from history, from court records, from current well-respected therapists who are well known, and others, like several pages of support for the fact that SRA is real. So I think that some Christians who believe SRA isn't real might have been in a communication with a woman who in the middle of the night messages them or texts them, "Daddy, Daddy, please stop, make Daddy stop." And they might have thought she was mentally ill instead of realizing that they were hearing from a child part of the woman. And it's a travesty that Christians don't understand dissociation, which I didn't until I started researching all this. It's disbelieved and unacknowledged, and that when these dissociated parts start talking about rituals, which certainly is not always the case with dissociated parts, but sometimes it's the case, that Christians don't want to believe it's real. It's very important for Christians to understand this is a real phenomenon. So pull it out from being hidden in plain sight, because that's what it is right now. It's hidden in plain sight. Pull it out into the light. Let's shine the light on it and understand that some of the people executing this abuse are people in high positions of power and influence, even in possibly in your local city. So to the church, I would say this need is overwhelmingly great. You may think you don't know anybody, but I'm guessing you do. There are so many who've suffered from extreme abuse in childhood that sometimes people listen to your podcast, Lisa, and they think, oh, my problems, all the problems I'm having finally make sense. So my heart is for these survivors. They are amazing people. They are wonderful people, but my heart is also for real, honest to goodness Christians, people who really know Jesus, to have a better understanding of dissociation, dissociative identity disorder, demonization, extreme abuse like satanic ritual abuse, how dissociation is used by traffickers. It's one of their best tools, and even projects of a higher level that are being carried on. This isn't just theory. These people are around us and they need help. And you can go to school to learn about it, but often some of the most important things to learn aren't mentioned in the schools. So if you're going to go to school to become a licensed counselor, I would say if you're going to also help people from an SRA background, there are things you need to learn outside of the classroom as well. And I recommend two things, which I've talked about already: going to the Lord to expand your capacity to be a compassionate witness, and keep going back to him, Have a deep walk with the Lord yourself. He is faithful and he will deepen you for this work. And second, ask him what he wants you to do. Does he want you to be a prayer minister, a spiritual coach like what I do, or does he want you to be a friend and walk alongside? Does he want you? One woman is convinced he's called her to be an investigator. So seek the Lord about what he wants you to do, and look to him. Look to him alone, I will say. Learn from others, learn from Lisa, learn from other people who are out there, but seek the Lord about what he wants you to do. And being that compassionate witness, that's something all of us, I believe, can do, and I believe should do, to be a compassionate witness for those around us. We'll go back to the Lord again and again, to the feet of Jesus, and we'll ask him for help, because this is a worthy work. It's a good work. We're caring for the precious wounded souls of abuse survivors, and we are helping them get to the Savior and Good Shepherd of their souls. This is missionary work in a way. So it's a privilege to do this work, and we can look to Jesus for his help in accomplishing it.
I would like to end with, what word would you have to say to survivors listening today?
There is great hope. That's my main word, hope. And I have several people in my life who have said to me, I'm glad you can hold on to hope because right now I don't have any. And I've said, that's okay. I'll hang on to it for both of us. There is great hope. The hope is in the Lord, who made heaven and earth and who loves you and who wants to deliver you. There is great hope in him. And all the twisting that's been done, one of the reasons I write my book is for people who've had scriptures twisted for them in terrible, evil, satanic ways, to untwist those scriptures and help people see who God really is. There's a great hope for you to know him as he really is, for you to have a real relationship with him, not as the Jesus he was that was presented to you, who was often a very satanic, fake Jesus, but the real one who's a good shepherd and who loves you and who wants to carry you in his arms and who wants to bring deliverance. There is great hope. And I think the survivors are amazing and wonderful people. There's some of the, I often tell people, most of my friends are smarter than I am, because some of them are brilliant people. They were doing long division when they were 3 and things like that. So I love my survivor friends. They are amazing and wonderful people, and I'm so privileged to know them. But my main key word is hope.
I like hope because in the Bible it said Abraham, who against hope believed in hope. And that's when he had the promise of Isaac coming, but he was pushing 100 and Sarah was pushing 90, and he still hoped where physically there was none. And as a survivor, they suck hope out of you. I mean, hope is just something you just can't grasp anywhere. So
biblical hope isn't like modern day hope, like I hope it'll be sunny tomorrow. It's more of anticipation or expectation. So I have said I'm an incurable optimist, but it's not really optimism, because optimism doesn't have a reason behind it. But I have a reasonable hope because I know that God is good and he is powerful. So I have that expectation or anticipation of his deliverance.
And he does, because I've talked to so many women and men now too, and God is setting us free, person by person.
Yes.
Deliverance team by deliverance team. God's bringing people around to do that. So you are a hero to me, Rebecca. I appreciate you so much. God bless you for all that you are doing to help us.
Well, I greatly appreciate you, Lisa.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.